Thank you very much, and I must thank you, Katya, to giving me this opportunity to present this presentation, which is pretty passive. I mean, if you compare this to Mike's heady session, I may run the risk of putting you to sleep. So I call it art writing from below, and I want to issue a caveat first because I wanted to structure it in a very linear manner. I wanted to have a linear presentation of focused on art writing and the art scene of Dhaka, especially what has been, what the part is focused on, the emerging art scene. So the response to art writing is pretty somnolent in Bangladesh, as you can see, and the word below in the title above refers to the status of art writing in Bangladesh. It has nothing to do with the duality of the periphery and center. The country where criticality in art and art writing is by and large considered superfluous. In fact, art writing, especially those that are not part of promotional gambit, is often seen as an instrument of null consequences. Art writers thus speak from a void. So as an art writer, we do speak from a void because we address an imaginary audience. I mean, we all do address an imaginary audience as artist and art writer. So from within this gaping emptiness, any form of critique, exegesis, in this part of the world need to pay attention to this absence of textual reinforcement, because there is a dearth of art writing in Bangladesh, and before grappling with aesthetic variables, linguistic idioms, and the special social context to which they make their appearance, you need to pay attention to this void, the symbolic void. Historically, the aesthetical and the theoretical have been close kins. In the Indian context, there is a book titled Ujjwal Nilmani, which I misplaced. Of course, I wanted to show a photograph of that book. The bright blue stone in Bangla, Ujjwal Nilmani. This is related to the Krishna cult of Bengal. It is still in circulation amongst the researchers and in Xerox form, of course, which testifies to the Chaitanya Vastavite's theoretical inclination. The tome is a huge tome. It's suffused with detailed out accounts, nuances, and rasha, which is essence in, usually translate as essence in English, and bhab or bhabha, state of being, becoming, condition, etc., expressed in poetic gestures and analytical exactness, written by one of 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, which is used to be part of undivided Bengal. You have a district called Nodia in West Bengal, which is next to Joshore, the part that once constituted Nodia. So this is the book is from this, addresses this Nodia school of Chaitanya Dev. This is also referred to as Gauriya Vaishnava tradition of Bhakti movement, who lived during the 15th. These Goswamis lived during the 15th and 16th centuries. So relationality, and I think it be interdisciplinarity, and there's this Vishnu Dharmotar Puran or Purana, which depicts a story where King Vajra wishes to build a temple to install an idol. He asked the sage Markandeya, "O wise one, enlighten me as to how I should install an image in the temple." In reply, Markandeya relates a story. A series of questions and answers unfold due to this. And following is the condensed utterance: "O king, the man who does not understand the painting cannot grasp the characteristics of idol making. Without understanding the art of dancing, it is impossible to understand painting. The one who does not understand music of instrument will find very difficult to grasp the art of dancing. Without song, you cannot understand music. Without language of poetics, you cannot understand song." So how related they are, the disciplines that we talk about. But defying any kind of synoptic vision, one which enables the onlooker, examiner, or the student to look at things simultaneously, togetherly. At the art school across Bangladesh, one learns to consider art, the realm of art, as an insular world, having little or no connection to other areas of praxis and knowledge. Therefore, to situate the issue of criticism on the cultural constellation of Bangladesh, almost like a transgression of sorts, in the otherwise untrammeled goings-on involving production and consumption. So there's this oral processes that we talk about, which is related to Chaitanya Dev, and also much later when Lalon appeared in the cultural scene, and the written memory aids that we've been able to develop after we were colonized 200 years back. Any culture preserve and transmit memories through both of the above. And there is an interfacing at any moment of history. Even today, orality is an important part of our artistic discourse. However, the oral discursive patterns, which used to fall outside the ambit of the Kolkata and later Dhaka moderns, were often considered inferior to contemporary trajectories. It was Jyotirindranath Tagore, the eldest son of Devendranath Tagore, who, in the early divisive environment, was one of the few to have cast an appreciative eye on Vaishnava literature. We had to wait longer for Bengal moderns to cast an appreciative gaze on various other trajectories of rural image-making tradition. Aesthetic position, thus, is the most important part of our claim to history. There were both genuine and superficial stances focused primarily on negation of the academic realism, naturalism. So I'm talking about the early British schooling that was launched in the mid-19th century. Anshumanda did focused on that bit in his very first presentation. So the British schooling was squarely based upon the dichotomy of realism and the indigenous traits. So from Abanindranath Tagore to Nandalal Bose, all were inclined to hybridist experimentation, where the resultant cultural mix could only be described as the brio representing Indo-Perso-China strain of praxis. However, theoretically, what was being circulated was nationalism and its fitting gestures in art. So they were all seeking for a gesture fitting to the kind of nationalist framework they developed. Shamacharan Srimani, one of the first Bengali art historian on whom, this is how the written text began to appear in Bengal after the introduction of printing press by the colonizers, the colonial elite. The first Bengali art historian, Shamacharan Srimani, on whom Abul Mansur once dedicated a small tract, wrote way back in 1880s, this should be 74. Recently, we have experienced that some artists are contemplating with seriousness English art schooling. In their practice, what becomes noticeable is the value they attach to verisimilitude. For me, verisimilitude is not as strong a virtue as it is a vice. So as you can see, the bifurcation appears through his writings. The struggle to assume and express an identity, the racialist perspective, Havel's vindication of the beauty. I think probably I wouldn't have to introduce Havel at this point of our session. Vindication of the beauty of Indian art and the great ideals which inspired it was a soothing balm to the bruised self of a people who felt no pride in their past. So it was all about reviving the pride than the past. His racialist approach distorted. I'm quoting here Bhuvanendran, N. Bhuvanendran, who has this wonderful tome written in 1991. titled Interpretation of Indian Art. So Havel's racialist approach distorted his vision, resulting in the chauvinistic view of Indian culture and history. The very title of one of his works will be self-explanatory: History of Aryan Rule in India from the earliest times of the death of Akbar. To Havel, Bhavinandran goes on, Akbar was an Aryan because he had Iranian blood in his veins. Shamacharan Srimani wrote a book. The first book was titled Shukho Shilper Utpatti o Arjo Jatir Shilpo Chaturi, Origin of Fine Art and the Aesthetic Sensibilities of the Aryans, published from Calcutta, now Kolkata, in 1874, was the first work of art history, as I've already said, which gave rise to a significant body of art criticism in Bengali connected to the anti-colonial independence movement, according to Matthew Rample, who wrote the preface to the book Art History and Visual Studies in Europe, Transnational Discourse and National Frameworks. The racialist frame emerged through the historian's claim that the rigorous practice of verisimilitude or naturalism is in European import was not far from the truth. Shantiniketan is seen as a conscious alternative by Muthu Kumar Shami and Molly Koshal, an intermediary space where the folklore is constitutive of the third space distance from the nationalistic zeal that rejects the West and the westernized nationalism, which rejects the folk and traditional. So that's the interstice. We can frame it as an interstice, Shantiniketan, back then in the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s. It stems from this interstice where the negotiation in its authentic form occurred. And in the works of Nandalal Bose, the series Haripura posters, entitled Haripura posters, done during a convention of the Indian National Congress at Indore in 1934, which testifies to the return he single-handedly scripted. Nandalal and his associates undertook to arrange a historic panorama of Indian art, including the copies of Ajanta and Bagh murals, Jain paintings, paintings from Rajput and Mughal schools, Kalighat potters. So it sparked off other trajectories, or it began to have offsprings, like Kamrul Hassan, who had once trained as Brotachari under the aegis of Guru Shoday Dutt, the visionary behind the Brotachari movement, which was part and parcel of a reclamation of the local aesthetic mores, was prioritized by Brotachari movement, and their aim was to raise the self-esteem and national awareness of people of undivided India, regardless of their religion, caste, sex, or age. So Kamrul Hassan came to Dhaka after partition and is still seeking to reinscribe the art scene with a new language, which he found in the techniques he borrowed from the rural Shara painters, who still prevails throughout Bangladesh. The mnemonic systems that help compress sweeping epics into memorable and retailable narratives, rhetorical devices, narrative structures, and the creative use of symbols help both the teller and the listener comprehend and remember a purely oral past. So there's this, you can introduce the dichotomy between the oral and the written cultures. The practice of Shara making, which is part and parcel of and pot painting, is linked to the oral tradition. The elevated status ascribed to the chroniclers and storytellers in oral culture is further evidence of the significance of transmitting memory. Thus, literary expressions, myths were the entry points to the cultural life. Once in Bengal, Lalan Fakir, or Shai, Lalan Shai, the 19th century bard, was the last important devotional discursive thinker who set a critical lens to social relations and norms, destabilizing mainstream hegemonic institutionalized knowledge bases, including the caste system. In the post-colonial regime, the need for critical reflections while navigating cultural productions has never been an issue of import, as I'm talking about Bangladesh. In the great constellation of cultural icons, occasions for value judgment was few and far between. If Rabindranath Tagore, this is an analogy I would like to draw, was the poet of natural beauty and universal love, consciousness remains the main carrier of ideas in his domain. Whereas in Lalon, body is the central trope and carrier of all kinds of thoughts and actions. And much of the devotional as well as critical interventions in alignment with Kabir, who preceded him, are cast on and around the body. Body for him is the abode of the being and also the site of action. Critical writing itself is an enterprise in evaluation and validation. Even in the thriving art scene of the 60s and the 70s in Bangladesh, and then before 1971 it was East Pakistan, and after 71 it is Bangladesh. Any form of critique has been a low priority in both academic and social life. Efforts of many a writer in the last 40 years or so have been primarily invested in generating either biographical accounts or as a form of apotheosis of the already venerated artist. Quality and context are thus whitewashed to prioritize the place of the icons on the national map and the national or in the national imaginary. The writing history of art or producing critical or exegetical text on art are by nature connected to interpretative frameworks. One dominant rhetorical device is often framed as art of the soil, which seeks to, this is in relation to what is in circulation in oral culture in Bangladesh, which seeks to give salience, both oral and written culture in Bangladesh, which seeks to give salience to situated art forms, though instead of performing an authentic judgment, it is employed mostly to celebrate a form which embellishes imagery with certain fragments perceived to have been of local origin. So this is the kind of pseudo-analytical frame which promotes judgmental biases rather than initiating value judgment. So an art scene without sustained reinforcement from thinking and appreciating gaze and the resultant textual practices is bound to suffer from amnesia, and much of our creative harvest in the last 50 years has been the casualty of time. History thus becomes a fragmentary method of retracing the past events or acts, if not becoming fully foggy in absence of value judgment. If value creation is history making, value judgment is a way of to register such an achievement. The value we assign to cultural products spring out of simultaneous processes. So what is prefigurative in art? In the imaginary of the educated middle class, the social group responsible for political and cultural reorganization in Bangladesh before and after the Liberation War of 1971, the idea of cultural and political actions are regularly seen as sanguine form of doing, rather than what they actually are. Actions that create sites of disagreement, debate, evaluation, and even at times collective envisioning of the future, concurrence or agreement. Today, to trace back to how the cultural political firmament of the 1990s and early 1980s and early 1990s have apparently later congealed into some major artistic tendencies in Dhaka seem like a daunting task, if not impossible. The mainstream narrative, there are shadowy patches through which thread of orgiastic experimentations of the late 80s and the 90s with the current praxis cast within various disciplines such as new intermediaries, digital media, performance, and photography, they are lost. To salvage the stories of the past seems all the more difficult as there have been little organized effort in archiving materials, the dearth of documents, printed books. These notes institute an interfacing between the public and the artist and writers, and there's the dearth of all these notes in Dhaka. and also throughout Bangladesh. Bengal, while it was united before partition, had failed to remain self-critical or even self-analytical. As much has been invested in the self-discovery at the fag end of the colonial rule. The Journal of the Indian, this should be Indian, I'm sorry about the typo, Society of Oriental Art, the Indian Society of Oriental Art is a case in point. During what is often dubbed as Bengali Renaissance, the modern cultural movement of awakening which swept the region from the second half of 19th century till the first half of the 20th century, criticality never assumed an important role. The independence of Bangladesh in 1971 released a collective energy which helped galvanize the figurative movement into some prominent streams, one that of S.M. Sultan and the other of Shahabuddin Ahmed. And a flurry of new experimentations, if not fully fledged languages, began to appear in the 1980s and 1990s. Yet the subsequent political mayhem before and after the killing of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the leader of the nation, further complicates the nation-building project, whose problematics regularly make their appearance on the cultural frontier. Often it is regarding the fact that both humans and other culture lie suspended on a wave of polarities rather than one imagined locus, we are given to nationalistic zeal. Bengalis are given to nationalistic zeal. Following the independence of Bangladesh, it is the alternative platforms and publications through which art writers had an opportunity to stage subsequent critical interventions. And I would like to remember Nirantar, which is a defunct journal. Used to be called Little Mac. There was this Little Mac movement centered on Shahbag, which is actually a zine introduced in the new millennium some major articles on art by Shobhan Shom, the Kolkata-based art writer, whose extensive research on Shafiuddin Ahmed and Kamrul Hassan was aimed at discerning the trajectories of their respective languages mapped from the initial inspirational sources to the flowering of their styles. The biographical details were used to provide the context of their praxis. So I'm going to jump to that part. This is my second part of the presentation. And here, this is the first issue we put out in 2010. So that it was the launch issue, and we had on cover Runa Islam's video cut into half just to make the augment the visual impact on the viewer, on the audience. So Depart as a repository of contextual, critical, and even polemical writings, it is put out in the market with the assumption that through textual and visual propositions, the reader's understanding of art and its mutating trajectories, as well as how they are related to other knowledge bases and the social economic structures, would stand modified. So this is a form of intervention. Depart raised the phrase close in contextual reading. Depart is focused on contemporary artist vocabularies, and we are dialogic in stance because we think of Depart as a palimpsest. We have several layers of positions put forth by our writers. Depart also likes to capture in length, breadth, and depth psychological, social, contextual dimensions of art to nurture individual talent and new ideas in new languages. So Depart is a venture planned by Art in Bangladesh, financed by Kaji Anisul Mukkid, who is the head of Art in Bangladesh. So we've been mapping the emerging art scenes since we launched in 2010. So our point of entry to the emerging art scene was transdisciplinarity, multivocity or vocality, interdisciplinarity. So there is a good bit of difference between the kind of installation our artists come up with and the ones that we try to emulate, which has been the West prerogatives. If installation of the West has been about convergence of the two kinds of spectacles, one that of the art forms and the other of the mass culture, or at least laying of one over the other, as Michael Archer claims in a book entitled Installation Art, in Bangladesh, the defining feature of that form is understood through collapse of the boundaries between disciplines as well as theatrical staging of objects, especially during the 1990s. So I'm going to run you through images, objects over like themes, called as the Kokon Chandra Sarkar, unexpected juxtaposition of objects. I'm referring to the first issue. So this is the outcome of a workshop Britto instituted back in that year, in 2010. Mustafa Zaman Sohail. These are the artists and artworks we've been showcasing in Depart. We are focused on the emerging art scene, as I've said. So this was part of the Asian Art Biennale, which is the first nodal point through which we got introduced to installation art, video art, and all the other languages that came pouring in since the launch of Asian Art Biennale in 1981. Joya Shirin-Hope, image over image. So the examples of non sequitur: Abdul Halim Chanchol, coalescing of the themes; Dali al-Mamun, moving images on stone objects; Atikul Islam, trauma and the body as evidence. Dali al-Mamun's 1997 installation sort of inaugurated the culture of installation making, so everyone followed suit. Now everyone wants to be installation artists. So trauma was an important point of departure for this artist. So there's an ongoing exhibition at Bengal Art Gallery at Dhanmondi, which also addresses trauma. Mahbub Rahman, medicalization of the body was his main theme. So critical frame of mind as an entry point to intertext. So I call them intertext because you have an overlapping, you have a kind of referencing that works like a palimpsest in some people's work. Abir Shon's video work, and you have objects photographed and videoed. So these are the works, these are the artists we've been encapsulating and we've been showcasing in subsequent issues. Each issue is usually cast around a particular theme, although we don't announce the theme out loud in textual form we don't put it on the cover. So this is a collage he did, a series of collage he did, negotiating classical art and classical personalities. Trauma again. Tayoba Bagan Lipi, one artist who was showcased again and again, because these are the people who are very, very active in the art scene. So these are the artists we were focused on, basically. And there are many more artists, but Dilara Begum Jolly, Mahbub Rahman, Rani Ahmed, Abdul Salam, Joya Shirin-Hope, Muhammad Wadi Zaman, Ripon Shaha, Rafiqul Shifu. So I can give a quick run through their artworks, just to give an idea of the art scene and how enthusiastic we are to look at their work and showcase their work in Depart, due to the fact that they are the ones who are trying to reinscribe the art scene with new languages and trying to come up with new methods of art making using traditional mediums and also non-traditional mediums such as object making, installation making, videos. So I'm going to end my presentation with these images. This was also part of Asian Biennale. Performance, installation, collaboration. As we were talking about co-production, this is a fine example of co-production. You have Pava artist collaborating with Mahbubur Rahman. Pava is a traditional Nepali form of painting. So we have Ronnie Ahmed here, so came up with a huge canvas in one particular solo exhibition at Alias Process. So I'm going to quickly run through this. This was the performance with which we inaugurated Depart, and it was conceived by Ronnie Ahmed, and Ritu Sattar, who is well known now as a performance artist, was the one who was resorted to, and she became the actress to stage the absurdist act by Ronnie Ahmed. So these are the artists who are also globe-trotting artists of Bangladesh, going to different sites and coming up with new plan of site-specific installations and performances. You have Rafiqul Shubho in the show. So I'm going to end my presentation with a glimpse into the indigenous moderns who emerged in the 1940s onward. So here is SM Sultan. I talked about SM Sultan and how they sort of coalesced two kinds of logic, one that of the Western art, and the other one is the regional specific subject matters. SM Sultan, these are huge canvases by Sultan. And Kamrul Hassan, who inaugurated a language, a politically inscribed language, which had social relevance, and which also conflated cubism and rural linear techniques, Shora painting. As you can see, the influence of Picasso, they are disjointed, trying to demonstrate the pain they feel. So for me, Rabindranath Tagore was the first man to have introduced the artist Rabindranath, who is never prioritized over the poet Rabindranath in the textual practice of the cognoscenti. So he's the one who introduced what we may term the articulation of the irrational into the art scene. So you have what you call in Bangla or Sanskrit Udbhat Rasha in his works for the first time, which appeared in Bengal. So it went totally unnoticed in the beginning, but text began appearing in the 1980s and 1990s in Bangladesh. And Qazi Munir, I'm fond of this particular person who spontaneously explicate the irrational and the imaginary. He used to be a vendor who turned into a painter. These are the sourced, these are the just throwaway papers used to make art. These are small pieces. So I'm going to end with Qazi Munir, and I have Depart copies. You can take them. we have this slogan one of my colleagues came up with, which is a departure from consensus reality. So we try to address things that are out of the ordinary, out of the box. So that's why we also have earned a bad name. So thank you very much. So that's it.